For this video, I wanted to talk about the process of making monochromatic studies in painting and why is it important, in my perspective at least, for both artists, seasoned and new, to be able to practice and master. Right up front, I also haven't been able to practice often, much less master this technique, which means that I made mistakes along the way in filming this video, which you will see further on. So don't judge me, okay? Let's learn together. Anyway, before we get on with it, I'd like to give credit and mention the following accounts. First, Watercolor by Shibasaki for inspiring some of the techniques that I employed in this video. And also Perfleur, yeah, because she also made a video about making monochromatic studies and that I really find just lovely. Both channels are worth checking out if you wish to learn more about art and watercolors specifically. Okay, with all of that out of the way, let's begin. The primary medium that I'll be using today is watercolor. It's a great starting point for those beginning to experiment with wet medium, and it is also perfect for monochromatic studies. Basically, monochromatic studies are paintings that are rendered in only one color. By doing this, the artist will be able to hone their knowledge and skill in controlling the water to paint ratio. So some would argue that watercolor may be too difficult of a medium for novices to pick up, but in my perspective, being well-rounded with watercolor immediately makes dealing with other water-based mediums a little bit easier. And I say only water-based because oil-based mediums are a whole other realm to dive into, which would need further research and experience. But I digress, so here are the materials that I used. I used the 18 color Sakurakoi watercolors and a custom palette with Pentel watercolors. This brand is fairly popular in the Philippines, so maybe you would be able to find the latter easily, especially in big bookstores. As for the Sakurakoi watercolors, you may need to shop online or go to bigger art stores. I also used my Chinese brushes, which I got from the Avir. Not sponsored, but would kindly appreciate it if it was, and an island brush from Berkeley. And for the watercolor paper, I used some good old industry standard, well, here at least, Canson 200 GSM watercolor paper made from wood pulp. Because of this, the paper shrinks without being properly stretched. And I didn't stretch my paper because I find it unnecessary, and also because I am hella lazy, so again, don't be judging me. Also, for this exercise, I recommend just using cheap watercolor papers instead of using bougie ass watercolor paper, like for example Arches, because it's wasteful in my perspective at least. Use that stuff for actual art pieces that you're going to sell or something. And anyway, being able to master watercolor using cheap paper and materials makes for a good practice in relying on skill more than the medium or material. And since I'm rambling again, I would get to that point some other time in the future. This is actually a watercolor sketchbook from Canson in collaboration with ABC. I don't know if you can still cop one of these, but it's a handy thing to keep if you want to travel around after the pandy, of course, with some art materials. And it's actually marketed as a traveling journal / sketchbook and has all these other freebies that you can use inside, which is really cute. So before doing the actual study or studies, I recommend warming up to the water to paint ratio first. It's advisable to make the swatches of the paint from a little to no water, which is the most opaque, to almost just water, which is almost transparent. I totally bombed this practice in one of my major art courses, so as you can see, I'm not very good at it as well, so maybe you can work on that better than I do. After you've warmed up to the mechanism of the paint, it's time to lay out your sketch. I personally have a hard time bearing in mind to keep my sketches light, so I tend to use HB or F graphite pencils. In this case, I didn't have one in hand, so I just used this Faber, whatever, Castel mechanical pencil with 2B graphite. Also, my dumbass forgot to semi-erase the sketch, so the outlines were peeking through the entire painting. I used a picture of a teacup with some tea and oranges in here to match the mood and my drink for the noon, and I was actually drinking black tea. Honestly, this symmetrical still life subjects like teapots, mugs, and pictures and stuff like that gave me such a difficult time in my first year of studying art. But I find that once you learn a bit of the concepts and you practice enough and observe before actually sketching can really help you improve. So as I'm laying down my first layer of paint, I keep it light and I make sure to take note of the lightest areas that we'll be leaving bare and the darkest area that needs to be very opaque. Since we're only using one color, the darkest dark areas would translate to the most opaque areas, or the areas that really needs a packed on color. While we're at it, I'd also like to touch on the importance of observing decisive and confident brush strokes, as opposed to hesitant, sort of going little by little brush strokes, especially in using watercolor. I feel as though I am not fully equipped, nor am I an expert in imparting methods on how you would be able to achieve confident brush strokes, because I also bombed it in studying art, but that's where Shibasaki-san would come through. In his videos, you would be able to see the precision of his strokes, that every single one that he makes has a purpose, and also having decisive brush strokes also helps with preventing to overwork the paper. Basically, overworking the paper would unravel the pulp and shred, then thin it out, which makes a kind of quote-unquote off-looking texture to the paper. Cheap watercolor papers are more susceptible to this because they're usually made from wood pulp, and that isn't as absorbent as cotton, made from cotton. That's why I mentioned earlier that practicing with cheap watercolor paper is ideal in order for the painter to focus on how they render the painting. The significance of practicing monochromatic paintings is really being able to paint mindfully. And what I mean by that is being certain of each step that you will be doing in rendering your painting. This will yield gratifying results in the sense that the amount of mistakes that you may possibly make along the way will be reduced, especially when you're using other mediums which aren't as forgiving as some. And for a concrete example, watercolors. Being able to have this mindset would translate well to working with other mediums and subjects, and would overall help you in your painting endeavors. And I actually wish that someone told me this earlier, so I'd be able to practice it even more. That concludes this video for today. Thank you so much for watching, and if you tried this before, or you'll be trying it soon, or you just have a question in mind, tell me all about it or ask away, and maybe we can chat in the comment section. And thanks again, and see you all in the next one.